The question Tao Te Ching answers is, how should we live our lives? And in answering this question, the question itself disappears. Many of us suffer from existential anxiety and dread, from not knowing what our purpose is, what the meaning of this life is. We suffer from loneliness, which often leads to depression. It's this cyclical phenomenon where our depression makes us more lonely and our loneliness makes our depression worse. Human nature has not changed since Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching. And it will not change in the next 100 years, 1,000 years. We'll advance technologically and we may integrate chips into our brains which speed up our computational abilities. But no matter how advanced we become, our technologies will never solve and has never solved the human question. How should you and I live our lives? Why are you here? What is the purpose of your life? What is the meaning of all of this? How do you find everlasting peace? The answer to these questions aren't going to come from technology, or aren't going to come from the advancement in technology. And the more you ignore these questions in your own life, the more your existential dread is exacerbated. And sometimes it gets so unbearable that you are tempted to end this life because you cannot find the answer, like Leo Tolstoy attempted. So the questions are, why are you filled with anxiety even though your life is so comfortable? Why do you feel so depressed when you have all the material wealth? You have no lack in your life. Why do you still feel like you're missing something? You see, we live under this assumption that if we simply change our brain chemistry through drugs like SSRIs, then your depression will be cured, gone, never to return. But more often than not, once you get onto these drugs, it gets more difficult to get off them. Your salvation, the promised salvation, that you'll be cured from these mental anxiety, this dread, becomes your curse. You become dependent on these drugs to make you feel better. So you return over and over and over again. In reality, nothing changes in you. Now, your being, your soul, all the changes that are truly lasting must come from within, internally. Nothing external can truly change you. This is episode 36. I hope you're enjoying this podcast, and if you are, please consider signing up and supporting my work on Substack or on Patreon by clicking the link in the description. And help me get this in front of like-minded people by sharing it with your friends, your families, and leave a 5-star review on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, or subscribing with the bell if you're on YouTube. Let's get into this episode. To be moderate is to follow Tao without straying. To follow Tao without straying is to become filled with good energy. To become filled with good energy is to overcome all things. To overcome all things is to know that all things are possible. She who knows that all things are possible is fit to govern people, because she is one with the mother. Her roots go deep, her foundation stands firm, her life lasts long, her vision endures. Tao is the hidden secret source of all life. Good men recognize that Tao provides for them, and therefore they esteem it. Bad men don't recognize this, but the Tao doesn't stop providing for them. That's an excerpt from the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu, and this translation is by Brian Brown Walker. This is the second episode I'm doing on Tao Te Ching. The first one was episode 18. If you haven't listened to that one, go and listen to that one first and then come back to this. The excerpt I just read are from 2 different chapters in the Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching is comprised of 81 short chapters, and it's a guide on how to live in this world, how to live in harmony, how to find purpose and meaning. It can be understood and read by every single person. And the incredible thing about the Tao Te Ching, like with many other sacred texts, the level of wisdom that you can draw from the Tao Te Ching is wholly dependent on your capacity for apprehending the truths embedded within it. So the more you work at understanding, at trying and attempting to dig into what the Tao Te Ching is teaching you, the more you'll get out of it. And Tao Te Ching is no different. You must read it and then read it again. And each time you read it, your knowledge expands, your understanding grows deeper. Lao Tzu, as you know from episode 18, he's the ancient Chinese philosopher and considered the founder of Taoism. And Tao, it's very difficult to translate, but it is seen as the cosmic force that is eternal, that is imbued in all things, and is that which all created things owes its existence to. And Lao Tzu's call for you is to accept Tao in your life. Because he says, without Tao in your life, you are going to live a half-lived life. But more often than not, most of us refuse to seek after Tao because we find that it's difficult, it's elusive, it's something that takes time, it's something that requires effort and energy to understand. Even though the Tao Te Ching is very famous for its idea of Wu Wei, acting by non-acting, the whole point of acting by not acting is that once Tao is flowing through you, there's no longer any straining that you do. You are filled with Tao, you're filled with wisdom. And this is why in the Tao Te Ching it says, only the wise seeks out Tao, and when they find it, they rest in it. And I quote, why have sages prized Tao for so long? Because with Tao, he who seeks finds, and he who has flaws is forgiven. This is why it is the treasure of the world. This is reminiscent of two parables from Jesus when he's talking about the kingdom of heaven. The first parable is that of a man who finds treasure in a field. And so he goes out and sells all that he has to buy this land just so that he can dig up this treasure again. The second parable is of the man who finds a pearl of great worth. And so he goes out and sells all that he has simply to return to purchase this pearl. So too Tao is like the kingdom of heaven. It's worth everything you can muster, all the energy, all the focus, all the time that it requires. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. And the point that Lao Tzu is making is, don't leave this life without Tao. Be like Jacob from the Old Testament, if you know your Old Testament, who wrestles with the angel of God throughout the night into the early morning, just so that he can get his blessing. And he is relentless. So finally the angel of God, realizing that Jacob is not going to stop, that he will not relent, finally blesses Jacob. And Lao Tzu's teaching is you should continually seek after Tao. Be like Jacob. Wrestle with the angel of God until you receive that blessing, until you find the wisdom. And so you might ask, well, how do you find this Tao? Tao moves and descends and ascends, flows out and in, and Tao is in all things. As Lao Tzu writes, the great Tao floods and flows in every direction. And I go on to quote another part. The heart of Tao is immortal, the mysterious fertile mother of us all, of heaven and earth, of everything and not thing. Invisible yet ever present. You can use it forever without using it up. What Lao Tzu is getting here at is that Tao is everywhere, right? It is in all things. It is descending and ascending. It is moving in and out. Everything that exists because of Tao. Tao is an everlasting spring. And only when you return to Tao do you find this eternal rest that you've been seeking, right? This existential despair that you have all crumbles when you accept Tao. The very meaning of your life is to act in union with Tao. And this is what Lao Tzu is saying. It's ultimately to act as a whole, as part of the universe, to see your life as part of this eternal drama of the cosmos. Everything that's happening around you, to understand that you are part of it, that you are not separate, you are not divorced from it, that you are not this special thing propped up, better than everybody else. No, you are part of this whole eternal drama. And only when you understand this, only when you accept this, can you find the meaning of your life. Only in seeing your existence in this teleological and ontological manner, where you rise up to grasp the significance of it all, then understand the significance of your own particular existence. And as I mentioned earlier, the word Tao is difficult to translate and even to describe, and that's part of the reason why Lao Tzu continually describes Tao in different ways. And one of the ways that Tao is described is through poetry, by merging opposites to speak without saying words. Especially because Tao is infinite. It is beyond us. It is ineffable. And also it is the source of all things. It is that which preserves all these created things. By nature of it being the source of all things, Lao Tzu says, you must return to it and allow it to flow through you if you want to live in harmony and if you want to find the purpose. If you want to understand why it is that you're here, what is it that you're supposed to do, you must allow Tao to flow through you. And in the opening of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu writes, Tao is beyond words, beyond understanding. Words may be used to speak of it, but they cannot contain it. Tao existed before words and names, before heaven and earth, before the 10,000 things. It is the unlimited father and mother of all limited things. Therefore, to see beyond boundaries to the subtle heart of things, dispense with names, with concepts, with expectations and ambitions and differences. Tao and its many manifestations arise from the same source, subtle wonder with mysterious darkness. It is the beginning of all understanding. Lao Tzu is expounding on this point that Tao is ineffable ultimately. You can use words to speak about it, but words cannot contain it. You can have concepts, but concepts cannot define it. Because he says Tao existed before words and names, before heaven and earth, before the 10,000 things. Tao was in the beginning. And Tao is the source, the cosmic energy, the ultimate reality that pervades all things and sustains all things. What Lao Tzu is getting at is to emphatically get you to see that contained in you is the same power which formed the universe, right? The same source which is stitched into the fabric of reality. That cosmic power, this eternal logos, this logos exists within you. It is the same logos which the Christians say was at the beginning of time, spoken of in the Gospel of John and the book of Proverbs. In the Gospel of John it reads, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God." It is also the same principle which the Stoics expressed in their philosophy, that the Logos is the pervading energy, the pervading force, the power which guides the whole universe, which guides all things in existence. And for the Stoics, this is precisely why, when you understand that the Logos is guiding all things, that all things have this teleological direction, it makes it much easier to accept whatever it is in your life. It is much easier to see that the obstacle is the way. And nothing happens to you which is not brought forth, which is not guided by the Logos. And in the very same sense, Tao is this thing. And Lao Tzu is emphatically trying to get you to understand this. So he writes, everything in existence depends on it. It being Tao, and it doesn't deny them. So when you seek after it, it will not deny itself to you. He goes on to say, everything in existence is clothed and nourished by it, by Tao. So everything in this world, in this universe, has the Tao within it, and the Tao is that which guides it and grows it and nourishes it. And I'm continuing, but it doesn't lord over anything. And then finally, everything in existence returns to it, and still it doesn't lord over anything. So when things come into existence, Tao is that which brings it into existence. And when things finally go out of existence, it doesn't get annihilated and disappears, never to exist again. Instead, Lao Tzu's point is, if and when you go out of existence, you return back to the source of all things, which is Tao. And this means that to accept Tao, to accept that there is this eternal source, this eternal Logos, For Lao Tzu, you must empty yourself of your ego, of your pride, of your resistance. He writes, Tao is a whirling emptiness, yet when used, it cannot be exhausted. Out of this mysterious well flows everything in existence, blunting sharp edges, untangling knots, softening the glare, settling the dust. It evolves us all and makes the whole world one. When you finally stop resisting Tao, you become whole, you become one. And in killing your pride and your ego, you find your true self. And you find that the Tao is never ending, it's never exhausted. You can return to a drink from the eternal spring of Tao, and this spring will never dry up. It reminds me of the story when Jesus is traveling with his disciples and he rests at a well, and there's a Samaritan woman bringing up water, and Jesus asks for some water, and the Samaritan woman says, if you knew who I was, you wouldn't ask for water. And Jesus tells her that the water I give you, if you drink from it, you will never thirst again. And she says, what is this water? Give it to me. And so similarly, Tao, when you accept Tao, when Tao pervades you and flows through you, you will never thirst again, right? Because it is the eternal spring that Lao Tzu is trying to describe to you, is trying to get you to understand. Lao Tzu wants us to become one with Tao. The thing that you've been avoiding to answer because you think your life is too busy, that there's no time to answer these perennial questions of what is the point of this life? What is the meaning of this? Why am I doing all these things that I'm doing and filling up my time with this? When you don't accept Tao and when you continually resist Tao, you will never find the answer. Right? You will never find this peace that you're searching for, because you can do this for your whole life. You can continue to keep avoiding these questions, these perennial questions that we've been asking ourselves. Only those who ask will find the answer. Those who never seek the answer will never find the question. Lao Tzu writes, the greatest virtue is to follow Tao and only Tao. You might say, but Tao is elusive, evasive, mysterious, dark. How can one follow that? By following this, out of silent, subtle mystery emerge images. These images coalesce into forms. Within each form is contained the seed and essence of life. Thus, do all things emerge and expand out of darkness and emptiness. When you become one with Tao, you never lose your life because you return back to the source. So when Lao Tzu says, within each form is contained the seed and the essence of life, thus do all things emerge and expand out of darkness and emptiness. This is very similar to the previous episode we did. It's episode 35 with the Sufi master, Nevid Ergin. When the Sufis talk about the annihilation of the self and the idea that the path of idlaq, this path of annihilation, the goal is to reach to God, to go be in union with God, and finally to go beyond God, towards absence and towards nothingness. And similarly here, you notice that Lao Tzu uses this idea of emerging and expanding out of darkness and emptiness. What it's pointing at is that this longing that you have, this existential uneasiness that you have this because that can only be filled with Tao. That is only for Tao to fill. For the moment you understand Tao, you immediately also grasp the eternality and the beauty of it all. And in that moment, you find a deep sense of fulfillment and of peace. So Lao Tzu writes, the wise person acts without effort and teaches by quiet example. He accepts things as they come, creates without possessing, nourishes without demanding, accomplishes without taking credit, because he constantly forgets himself. He is never forgotten. The first part of this is very familiar to us in that the wise person acts without effort and teaches by quiet example, meaning the wise person lives a life that is in harmony with what they believe, what they preach, and what they teach. For only the wise person understands that You must live a life consistent with what you teach. Otherwise, you are a fraud, you are a hypocrite. And it is far worse to be a hypocrite than to be ignorant and make a mistake. And the second part of this, he accepts things, the wise person accepts things as they come, creates without possessing, nourishes without demanding, accomplishes without taking credit. Here's this idea of when you do good acts, when you do acts of charity, when you do acts out of the fullness of your heart, simply do them and don't think about them. Don't think about whether the person on the other side will reciprocate later on down the line. Simply do. Nourish without demanding. Creates without possessing. Accomplishes without taking credit. Act not for the praises of others. Act not so that you can take credit for a positive outcome. Simply act because that is your virtue. That is a character that is embedded within you. Make it such that if you were not to do this act of charity, of generosity, then you would be in contradiction with your own beliefs. So become that person who is generous because you become generosity itself. And this is done through Tao. When Tao, Lao Tzu says, shapes you and you become a vessel, then you can have your character molded by it. For example, a cup is only useful for drinking if it has a deep crevice within it. A flute can only play beautiful music if it has been carved. So too, Lao Tzu's point is be like the cup and be like the flute. Be the instrument through which you nourish others freely and give peace through the movement of your own life. Make the movement of your life the most beautiful music that you can create. So I read Lao Tzu here. To know honor and yet keep to humility is to be the value for the world. Being the value for the world, rich with the primal power of Tao, you return once again to simplicity, like carved wood. Allow Tao to carve you into a vessel for Tao. Then you can serve the world without mutilating it. Don't become too attached to how many people you've helped, how generous you've been. Simply act out of the fullness of your heart. Do not keep tabs on who you've helped, what you've done. Simply do the action and then forget about it. Again, I'm reading a quote. Interfere with things and you'll be defeated by them. Hold on to things and you'll lose them. The sage doesn't interfere, so he doesn't fail. Doesn't hold on, so he doesn't lose. Because projects often come to ruin just before completion, he takes as much care at the end as he did at the beginning and thereby succeeds. This last part where he's talking about projects come to ruin just before completion, and so the wise person takes care at the end as much as he did in the beginning, is this idea of making sure that if you're on the path of wisdom and you're growing in it, make sure to never let your guard down. Because in your arrogance, you might think that you are wise, and so you no longer need to read, you no longer need to study, you no longer need to contemplate, you no longer need to act. But in those moments, just as if you stop paying attention at doing a difficult task that requires all your focus, say that you're a swordsmith and you're quenching your blade in the water, and for a second you lose your focus and you dip it in for too long, and so then when you go to reshape it, the whole blade shatters. Don't be like that. Instead, be fully focused at every single point, at every single moment. Understand that nowhere and no time should you ever let your guard down. And only then do you succeed. And the second part of this, when he says, hold on to things and you lose them, the sage doesn't interfere, so he doesn't fail. It's this idea of understanding that what you have, you really don't have. The things that you think you own, you don't really own anything. I can think that I own this land, this house that I live in, but suppose that there's a huge earthquake and the house gets swallowed up. Now, where's this house that I live in? Where's this land that I have paid property taxes on? It's all gone. And so Lao Tzu says, do not hoard, do not hold on to things. And when you don't hold on to things, when you don't hoard, when you are not obsessed with trying to make everything yours, and you have a perspective of detachment, and as he says, possessing nothing at all, then will you find this complete serenity, because you are now detached from this life of materiality. In finding Tao, you find peace, you find wholeness, you find rest. And rest is what we are often lacking in our lives. We often don't realize that rest is what you need, the serenity is what you need until you're on the verge of collapsing, until you're on the verge of death, until you're on the verge of losing everything. We see this in the book that we did with Paul Kalanithi, when he finds out as a young neurosurgeon, newly married, with stage 4 lung cancer, and he only has about 22 months to live. He realizes right there and then what is most important to him in his life. And my friend, Father Alan, lent me a book called Lean Out by Tara Henley, where Tara is a journalist and she recounts how at the height of her career as one of the leading journalists in Canada, she's struck with mysterious chest pains and skin issues and weakness and fatigue. And through doctor appointments and scans and blood tests, she finds out that all this is caused by her lifestyle of always living on the go, of overworking, of living a life of anxiety and of stress, and trying to make it in this world by attending all these parties with princes, prime ministers, presidents, celebrities, and doing everything at once, rushing, living life on the fast lane, only to realize that her life, the sickness that she's experiencing, is all caused by her lifestyle and caused by her inability to rest, her inability to see that what is most important to her is not this lifestyle that she's dreamt about and has finally attained. So she leaves it all behind. And this is why the book is called Lean Out, because she's leaning out. And in so doing, she finds the serenity that she once knew as a child. It's a good book. You should go read it if you haven't read it already. Tara is not alone here, right? Many of us are living this type of life, and our bodies react to it accordingly. And Lao Tzu says something that is appropriate for this. It goes, filling to fullness is not as good as stopping at the right moment. Over sharpening a blade causes its edge to be lost. Line your home with treasures, and you won't be able to defend it. Stopping at the right moment, understanding when enough is enough, that is something only wisdom allows you to do. Something that only, according to Lao Tzu, Tao allows you to see. It is a sage whose only desire then becomes to be free of desire. And so I read this quote, his only desire is to be free of desire, fancying nothing, learning to not know, electing not to interfere. He helps all beings become themselves. Why does this concept of being free from desire return to us over and over again, whether that's through the Tao Te Ching, whether that's in the Sufi path of annihilation, whether that's in Confucianism, whether that's in Epictetus, in the book of Proverbs, in Ecclesiastes? Why does it keep coming up? And the reason it keeps coming up is because the wise sages have come to see that human nature has not changed. The thousands of years that humans have been around, the nature of humanity has never changed. We are both animal and beyond animal. We are, to use Aristotelian terminology, we are rational animals. And because we are rational animals, it means that our animalistic sides are, if not careful and not contained and not mastered, it will be the one driving us. It will be the one that pushes us to do these things that we think are going to be helpful to us. But really, it turns into a cycle of self-destruction. And Lao Tzu here wants us to be the ones who understand this and realize that Your only desire should be to be free of desire. To no longer want any external praises, to no longer want anything beyond Tao. And to see that knowing is not the same as experiencing and living it out. And once you come to this realization, to stay on this path of Tao. So I read, to be moderate is to follow Tao without straying. To follow Tao without straying is to become filled with good energy. To become filled with good energy is to overcome all things. To overcome all things is to know that all things are possible. She who knows that all things are possible is fit to govern people because she is one with the mother. Her roots go deep. Her foundation stands firm. Her life lasts long. Her vision endures. So to follow Tao is to be filled with good energy. And what is good energy? And good energy is simply to be in the presence, be in constant union with Tao. Because in so doing, you can transcend this passivity of time where you're simply the receiver. And instead you can become actively part of what is unfolding because you are now aware of Tao. And that's why Lao Tzu says, because she is one with mother, her roots go deep, her foundation stands firm, her life lasts long, her vision endures. You remember earlier from one of the quotes where Lao Tzu says, because he forgets himself, he is not forgotten. Meaning when you're on this path of Tao, you ultimately come into union with Tao, and in so doing, you are not forgotten because you have now become Tao. I've mentioned this before, but what you see here and what Lao Tzu is expressing and describing within Tao is something that is evident within other traditions, whether that's within Sufism, whether that's within the Book of Proverbs, whether that's in the Analects of Confucius, whether that's also in the Hindu philosophy and theology. And I always say you should read these books when I'm doing them, because when you read the books for yourself, you'll see the similarities and the merging of all these ideas, but they're all using different languages. They're all using different concepts, right? Understandably so, because they're living in different times and different cultures and different eras. But one of the things, the notes that I made here was around Tao and the similarities found between Adi Shankara, the Advaita Vedantist philosopher, and when he's talking about Brahman. So he gives this analogy that you and I and everything that exists in this world are like pots, cups, and plates made from clay. But the clay, he says, is more real than the pots and the cups and the plates, because the clay is the underpinning, the substance through which these pots and cups and plates are made from. And that reminds me of what Lao Tzu is saying here about Tao, how Tao is ascending and descending, and how Tao flows through all things and all things return back to Tao. Like the pots and the cups and the plates, which cannot exist without clay that underpins their being. And Adi Shankara's point is that you and I cannot exist divorced from Tao. And in Adi Shankara's case, he's ultimately getting at this idea that because clay is the underpinning of the pots and the cups and the plates, the pots and the cups and the plates are ultimately identical to the clay itself, even though they can take different shapes and different forms. And hence why within the Advaita Vedantist, there is this relationship between the Atman being the Brahman, or I should say, there is this idea that the Atman, the soul, is the Brahman itself. So it becomes imperative to seek Tao. Like Solomon says in the Book of Proverbs, another episode that we've done, seek wisdom, for in her you will find life. Right? You'll remember that Solomon in Proverbs 8:11, he says, for wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. And then he says earlier, blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. If you haven't listened to that episode, I recommend listening to that episode after this episode, because you'll find that there's a lot of overlaps. I think one of the greatest lines that I've found in the Tao Te Ching is this line. In living, choose your ground well. In thought, stay deep in the heart. In relationship, be generous. In speaking, hold to truth. In leadership, be organized. In work, do your best. In action, be timely. To me, this points to how we should not over-intellectualize Tao or this life in general. Don't live a life of abstraction, divorced from community, divorced from relationship. Instead, live here and now. And when you understand Tao, don't go spending all your time simply reflecting on Tao and never actually engaging in this world in which Tao is present in all things. Only the over-intellectualized man or woman, the one who's actually not living in this life, the one who the Sufis call the bird without wings, who can theorize about flight but never takes flight, will say things like, Tao is only found in this forest, right, at a certain location, or wisdom is only found within this religion, or truth is only found within this particular group, or God is only present if you say your prayers in this ancient language, or peace is only found through this particular meditation that you must do. Lao Tzu would say, ignore them, ignore all of these people. They don't understand what they're talking about. Because Tao is ever present. Tao is in all things. It's above all things. It's in all things. It flows through all things. Tao can be found exactly where you're standing, exactly where you're sitting, exactly where you're walking. You don't have to go anywhere to find Tao. And Lao Tzu writes, Tao is the hidden secret source of all life. Good men recognize that Tao provides for them, and therefore they esteem it. Bad men don't recognize this, but Tao doesn't stop providing for them. This is identical to the concept within Christianity called common grace, where the good and the bad both receive rain, the good farmer and the bad farmer both receive rain. So the challenge for this week is to embrace simplicity. True change and peace comes from within. Right? It's not this external source or material wealth or anything that you're taking. Right? The Tao Te Ching emphasizes that the most important thing is aligning yourself with Tao, which is this fundamental force and source of light that underlies all existence. And one way to do this, which is through mindfulness, through meditation, through prayer, these things allow you to cultivate inner peace, inner simplicity. It allows you to reflect on your desires and allows you to process all the things that are happening around you, and for you not to act out reactionary, but act out of love, out of the fullness of your heart. And the second part is, when you align yourself with Tao, according to Lao Tzu, your life's meaning and purpose come to fruition. You come to see that living in harmony is what the point of life is. And when you accept this, and when you accept the flow of Tao, then you can see that whatever happens to you, you can overcome, you can allow it to happen without anxiety, without dread, because it is what is supposed to happen. And it is ultimately for your own good. And a practical way to do this, as I mentioned earlier, is to read the Tao Te Ching. If you haven't read Tao Te Ching, I recommend getting it. You can find the link in the description and order it. Just take time to read it. You can read the Tao Te Ching in like 2 hours. For some, even faster if you're just reading without processing. But if you read and process, it'll take you a very, very long time to read. The third challenge is something that we briefly spoke about just earlier, is this idea of generosity. Act with generosity and be generous. And when you are generous, do not think about whether the person receiving your generosity will return it back to you. Simply act and do acts of charity because that is part of who you are. And the way to do this is you could engage in community service, or you can volunteer at your place of worship. You can volunteer. And when you're doing these things, make sure you're interacting with each person intentionally as if the other person is divine. And there's a great story that Jesus tells in the book of Matthew, and I'm reading it. For when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and fed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you, a stranger, invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison, or go to visit you? And the king will reply, Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So when you're acting generous, do it as if the other person is divine. And with that, I'll wrap. If you want to support my work, head over to my Substack and Patreon. You can find the link in the description. And thank you to all those who are a paid member on Substack and Patreon. I appreciate you. Your support makes this work possible. I easily spend over 35 hours making every episode, and I love doing it. If you're thinking about supporting me, think of your subscription and becoming a paid member as a vote for a world where wisdom is available to all so that we can create a better, more loving, more peaceful world. I also understand that not everyone can support me in this manner, and that's okay. I appreciate your presence and your listenership regardless. If you're not ready to become a Patreon on my Substack or on our Patreon, but enjoy my work, share it with others, help spread wisdom in this world. But for those who are seeking to support, upgrading to a paid subscription on Substack or on Patreon is the best way. Thank you. Till next week, peace.